They really thought I would remain silent at my own engagement dinner. They believed I would just smile politely while they humiliated me and stole my rightful share right in front of 200 guests. But they did not know I had prepared everything. I had the evidence, the plan, and the cold patience of someone with nothing left to lose. As they raised their glasses to toast their own greed, they had no idea their lives were about to end. My name is Evelyn Moore. At 34 years old, I have built a life that looks impenetrable from the outside. I am a senior risk analyst for a private equity firm, a job that requires me to predict disasters before they happen and mitigate losses for people who have more money than sense. I own a pristine condo in downtown Seattle. I drive a German car that is paid off, and I have a credit score that opens doors. To the world, I am a success story, the kind of woman who has everything under control. But to my family, I am simply the one who cleans up the mess. Growing up in the Moore household meant learning early that love was conditional and usually came with a price tag. My parents, Robert and Linda, are the type of people who believe in the sanctity of the family image above all else. We are white, upper-middle-class Americans who go to church on holidays and post smiling photos on social media. But behind the heavy oak doors of my childhood home, the dynamic was far more transactional. They conditioned me to believe that my stability was a communal resource. I have spent the last decade playing the role of the silent benefactor. When my younger brother crashed his car 3 years ago while driving under the influence, I was the one who hired the lawyer and paid the settlement to keep it off his record. When my father made a foolish investment in a failing restaurant chain, I quietly transferred $20,000 to cover his losses so the neighbors would not find out. I never asked for repayment. I never asked for praise. It's just what we do, Evie, my mother would say, waving her hand dismissively whenever I tried to set a boundary. Family helps family. The problem was that the help only ever flowed in one direction. They viewed my success not as an achievement to be celebrated, but as a lucky break that I owed them for. I was the reliable one, the steady hand, the bank account that never closed. I absorbed the stress and the financial hits so they could maintain their lifestyle. I told myself it was fine. I told myself that being needed was the same thing as being loved. Everything was supposed to change with my engagement. When Mark proposed, I felt a shift in the atmosphere of my life. For the first time, I was prioritizing my own future. I believed that my engagement dinner would be a turning point, a night where I could finally step out of the role of the fixer and just be a daughter, a bride, a woman being celebrated. I wanted to believe that they respected me enough to let me have this one moment. I should have known better. The signs were there, simmering under the surface like a fever. The tension started weeks before the party. It was not loud or explosive. It was a quiet, suffocating pressure. My parents were too involved in the planning. They insisted on hosting the dinner at their country club, inviting their business partners, controlling the guest list. Every time I tried to assert an opinion, they shut me down with a smile. "You're just stressed, honey," my mother said when I asked why my name was listed second on the invitation. "Let us handle the details." 2 days before the dinner, my father called me. His voice had that smooth, reasonable tone he used right before he asked for something unreasonable. "We are so proud of you." "Evelyn," he said, but the pause that followed was too long. We think it might be time to discuss how the family assets are structured before you get married. You know, just to be safe." I stared at the phone, feeling a cold knot form in my stomach. "Dad, we can talk about business later. This week is about the engagement." "Of course," he replied, too quickly. "Of course it is." He was lying. I could feel the betrayal waiting in the wings, but I walked forward anyway. I put on my dress, I put on my smile, and I walked into the lion's den believing that my blood relations would protect me. I did not realize that the people I had spent my life saving were the ones waiting to tear me apart. I remember the day I realized I was merely an insurance policy with a heartbeat. It was not a sudden explosion of clarity, but a slow, suffocating accumulation of moments that I tried desperately to ignore. My brother, Julian, was the dreamer. He was the one with the bright eyes and the unfinished projects, the one who needed protection. I was the sturdy one. I was the one who did not need to be worried about, which is a polite way of saying I was the one who did not matter unless something went wrong. Throughout my 20s, the dynamic solidified into concrete. If Julian needed $5,000 for a startup idea that was doomed to fail, my parents called it an investment in his potential. If I bought myself a designer handbag after a 60-hour work week, my mother would look at it with a tight, disapproving smile. "Must be nice," she would say, her voice dripping with passive aggression. Some of us have to think about the future. The implication was always clear. My money was not mine. It was a reservoir for the family to draw from whenever the drought hit. I learned to stop sharing my accomplishments. When I received a promotion that came with a 15% raise, I kept it to myself. I learned that my success only bred resentment or entitlement. That was when the documentation began. It started as a defense mechanism against gaslighting. I would loan my father $10,000 for a bridge loan he swore he would pay back in 2 months. 6 months would pass, and when I gently brought it up, he would look at me with wounded eyes. I never said 2 months. "Evelyn," he would insist. "You're remembering it wrong. Why are you always so transactional?" So I started keeping records. I scanned checks. I saved emails. I recorded dates and times in a password-protected cloud drive. I did not do it because I wanted to sue them. I did it because I needed to prove to myself that I was not crazy. I needed to see the red ink on the ledger to remind myself that my generosity was being consumed, not appreciated. The isolation was absolute. At family gatherings, we performed the ritual of the perfect American family. My father would pour expensive wine that I often paid for and toast to our unity. Neighbors would tell me how lucky I was to have such supportive parents. I would smile until my jaw ached, feeling like an actor on a stage where everyone else had a script but me. I told myself it would get better. I told myself that once I was married, once I had my own family, the boundaries would naturally harden. I convinced myself that their behavior was just a quirk of their generation, a misguided form of love. But the illusion shattered 3 weeks before the engagement party. I was sitting in my parents' living room, reviewing the catering contracts for the dinner. I had explicitly asked for a specific local winery to supply the alcohol, a small business owned by a friend of mine. It was the one detail I had insisted on. As I flipped through the finalized invoice my mother had left on the coffee table, I saw that the vendor had been changed to a massive distributor my father had dealings with. When I confronted them, the air in the room grew heavy. My father did not even look up from his newspaper. "We changed it for the best," he said calmly. "It makes more sense for the family business image. Your friend's label is too obscure. But this is my engagement," I said, my voice trembling slightly. "I asked for one thing." My mother sighed, setting down her teacup with a sharp clatter. "Oh, stop being so dramatic. Evelyn, it is just wine. We are paying for the deposit on the venue, aren't we? You should be grateful we are handling the logistics." "I offered to pay for the venue," I countered. "You insisted on paying." "You insisted on hosting." "Because that is what parents do," she snapped. "We are doing this for you. Why do you always have to make everything a fight?" I looked at them, really looked at them. They had not just changed a wine vendor. They had overruled my desire, used my event to network for my father's business, and then gaslit me into feeling guilty for noticing. I realized then that I had no vote in this democracy. I was not a partner in this family. I was a subordinate. I started, then stopped, taking a breath to steady my racing heart. I just wanted something that felt like me. "It's a family event." "Evelyn," my father said, finality in his tone. "It reflects on all of us. Don't be selfish." I went home that night and opened my laptop. I stared at the folder labeled Evidence. For years, I had hoped I would never have to use it, but as I sat in the dark of my apartment, listening to the hum of the refrigerator, I realized the time for hope had passed. They did not respect me. They only respected what I could provide, and if they wanted to treat our relationship like a business transaction, I was finally ready to audit the books. The week leading up to the engagement dinner felt less like a celebration and more like a hostile takeover where I was the asset being acquired against my will. I had foolishly believed that this event would be the one time my parents respected my autonomy. I was wrong. Under the guise of helping me navigate the stress of wedding planning, they systematically dismantled every decision I made. I wanted a small, intimate gathering with 40 close friends. They turned it into a gala for 200 of their business associates. I wanted a jazz trio. They hired a string quartet because it projected the right image of old money. Whenever I tried to push back, the response was always a variation of the same patronizing theme. We were sitting at their mahogany dining table 3 nights before the party when my mother decided to critique my choice of dress. "Are you sure about that neckline?" "Evelyn," she asked, taking a sip of her Chardonnay. "It is a bit aggressive. We want people to look at your face, not wonder how much you paid for your chest." My brother, Julian, snickered from across the table. "Yeah, Evie. Don't want to scare off the investors. Or Mark. How is Mark handling the pressure? By the way, is he ready to be Mr. Evelyn Moore?" "His name is Mark," I said, my grip tightening on my silverware. "And he is my partner, not an accessory. We are just teasing." "Honey," my father interjected, though his eyes remained cold, "you have always been a bit sensitive. It is a tough world out there. You need to toughen up if you want to protect what is yours." That phrase stuck with me. Protect what is yours. Later that evening, I was in my father's home office looking for a stapler when I saw a document left carelessly on his blotter. It was a draft of a trust amendment titled The Moore Family Consolidated Asset Restructuring. Being a risk analyst, my eyes naturally scanned for anomalies. I saw my name listed, but not as a beneficiary. My status had been altered to silent contributor. And there was a clause regarding the transfer of my grandmother's legacy fund, a fund that was legally mine upon my 35th birthday. The date on the document was set for the night of my engagement party. My heart hammered against my ribs. I pulled out my phone and took 3 high-resolution photos of the pages before hearing footsteps in the hallway. I shoved the paper back exactly as it was. When I walked back into the living room, I decided to test the waters. "Dad," I said, keeping my voice level. "I was thinking about Grandma's fund. Since I am getting married, maybe we should sit down next week and discuss transferring the title to my name officially. It would help with the mortgage for the new house." The room went silent. My father exchanged a quick, unreadable glance with my mother. "There is no rush on that." "Evelyn," he said, his smile not reaching his eyes. "Actually, we have a surprise regarding that. We figured we would handle all the boring legal stuff for you so you can focus on being a bride. Just trust us. Trust is earned. Dad," I said. "And we are your parents." He snapped, his patience fraying. "Don't be ungrateful. We are protecting the family legacy. You will understand soon enough." The ambiguity of his answer chilled me to the bone. They were not just planning a party. They were planning a coup. I went home that night and barely slept. Every instinct in my body told me to cancel the dinner, to call Mark and run to the courthouse. But I needed to know the extent of their plan. I needed to see how far they were willing to go. The day of the party arrived with a gray, overcast sky. As I dressed in the gown my mother had criticized, I looked at myself in the mirror. I did not look like a blushing bride-to-be. I looked like a soldier putting on armor. I checked my purse to ensure I had my phone and a backup voice recorder. I drove to the venue alone. Mark was meeting me there, coming straight from a conference. As I pulled up to the valet stand of the country club, I felt a wave of nausea. The building loomed over me, grand and imposing, filled with people who thought they knew me. I handed the keys to the valet and took a deep breath of the crisp evening air. Showtime, I whispered to no one. I walked through the double doors, the sound of the string quartet drifting toward me. I knew I was walking into a trap, but for the first time in my life, I was not walking in blind. I was walking in with my eyes wide open, waiting for them to make their move. The ballroom was suffocating. 200 people were packed into the space, a sea of black ties and designer gowns that shimmered under the chandeliers. I stood next to Mark, my hand gripping his so tightly my knuckles turned white. My parents were holding court near the stage, looking like the benevolent monarchs of a kingdom built on sand. I tried to focus on the flowers, on the music, on anything other than the gnawing pit in my stomach. My father tapped his spoon against a crystal champagne flute. The sharp ringing sound cut through the chatter like a knife. The room fell silent, faces turning toward the stage with polite expectancy. If I could have everyone's attention, my father boomed, his voice amplified by the microphone. We are here to celebrate Evelyn and Mark, a beautiful union. Applause rippled through the room. I forced a smile, but my lips felt numb. But tonight is about more than just a wedding, he continued, his eyes locking onto mine with a predator's gaze across the crowded room. It is about the future of the Moore family. As you all know, Evelyn has done incredibly well for herself. She is the rock, the provider, the one who never asks for anything because she already has so much. He paused for effect, letting his words settle over the guests like a warm blanket. In the spirit of this new chapter, and to ensure the longevity of our family legacy, we have made a decision that reflects the values we instilled in her. He motioned to a man standing near the side of the stage, a notary I recognized from his office. Since Evelyn is entering a new family with Mark, and she is already so financially independent, we have decided to reallocate the Moore family trust, specifically the portion left by her grandmother, back into the central family holding. This will ensure her brother Julian has the capital he needs to launch his new venture, and it keeps the family strong. We knew Evelyn would want to make this sacrifice for her brother. It is her gift to us, to show that family always comes first. The room went dead silent. The air left my lungs. He was talking about my inheritance, my grandmother's legacy. He was stealing $300,000 from me in front of everyone I knew, framing it as my generous gift to them. If I objected now, if I shouted that this was theft, I would look like a greedy, ungrateful daughter ruining her own engagement party. Come up here. Honey, my mother chirped into the microphone, waving me forward with a manicured hand. Let's make it official. Sign the transfer so we can all celebrate your generosity? I stood frozen. I looked at Mark. He looked bewildered, his brow furrowed in confusion. Evie, he whispered, did you agree to this? I started, but my voice failed me. Don't be shy. My father laughed, but the sound was hard and carried a warning edge. She is just overwhelmed by the emotion of it all. Come on. Evelyn, don't keep the family waiting. I looked around the room. I saw my colleagues. I saw my friends. I saw my relatives. Not a single person stepped forward. Not one person said this was inappropriate. They just watched, holding their breath, waiting to see if I would play my part in the pageant. They expected me to walk up there, smile, sign away my future, and thank my parents for the privilege of being robbed. My mother's smile tightened, her eyes narrowing. Evelyn. Now. It was a command, not a request. The realization hit me with the force of a physical blow. They did not love me. They did not even like me. To them, I was just a resource to be harvested. They had staged this entire event not to celebrate my marriage, but to corner me in a public spotlight where I could not say no without destroying my reputation. They believed their trap was perfect. I looked at the pen in the notary's hand. Then I looked at my father. He raised his eyebrows, daring me to make a scene. I did not walk to the stage. I did not scream. I did not cry. I simply unclenched my hand from Mark's arm. The silence in the room stretched out, thick and heavy. I turned my back on the stage. I turned my back on the guests. Evelyn, my father, barked into the microphone, his voice losing its polished veneer. "Where are you going?" I did not answer. I walked toward the double doors, my heels clicking rhythmically against the marble floor. Every step was a severance. Every step was a bridge burning behind me. I pushed open the heavy doors and walked out into the cool night air, leaving the warmth, the lights, and the people who claimed to love me behind forever. I sat in the darkness of my living room, the silence of the condo pressing against my eardrums. My phone was vibrating incessantly on the kitchen counter, a relentless buzzing of calls from Mark, from my mother, from my father. I did not answer. I did not even look at the screen. I simply walked over, turned the device off, and placed it in a drawer. The time for talking was over. For the first hour, I felt a phantom sensation of shame, the heat of 200 pairs of eyes burning into my back as I walked out of that ballroom. But as the clock ticked past midnight and settled into the early hours of the morning, the shame evaporated. It was replaced by something far more useful and far more dangerous. It was the cold, clinical detachment I used when analyzing a failing portfolio. My family was no longer a group of people I loved. They were a liability. They were a bad investment that I had held onto for too long out of sentimentality. I went to my home office and booted up my server. I brewed a pot of black coffee and pulled up every financial record I had access to. I had always been the one to help them with their taxes, the one who organized their estate planning, the one who co-signed their loans. I had the passwords. I had the account numbers. I had the digital keys to the kingdom they thought they ruled. What I found made my blood run cold. It was not just the attempted theft of my grandmother's legacy fund at the party. That was simply the tip of the iceberg. As I cross-referenced bank statements from the last 5 years with credit reports I pulled that very second, I saw the pattern. There were withdrawals from a joint emergency account I had set up for my parents, listed as medical expenses, which coincided perfectly with my brother's trips to Las Vegas and Tulum. There were credit inquiries in my name that I had never authorized, dated back to when I was living in their guest house between apartments. They had used my social security number to secure favorable interest rates for refinancing their home, a home I had no legal claim to. They had not just humiliated me. They had been systematically stripping me of my assets while smiling to my face. I was their retirement plan. I was Julian's safety net. They had groomed me to be the host for their parasitic lifestyle. I stared at the glowing screen, my eyes dry and gritty. A normal person might have thrown a vase against the wall or collapsed in tears. I did neither. I opened a new spreadsheet. I labeled it Project Liquidation. If they wanted to treat our relationship as a business transaction, I would oblige them. I would not react like a wounded daughter. I would react like a forensic accountant uncovering embezzlement. I stopped seeing them as my mother and father. I saw them as hostile actors who had breached a contract. I began to list the steps. First, I needed to revoke the power of attorney I had granted my father when I was 25 and traveling abroad. Second, I needed to freeze the joint accounts immediately. Third, and most importantly, I needed to sever the financial umbilical cord that kept their image of wealth alive. I looked at the total sum of money they had siphoned off over the last decade. It was over $150,000. It was a staggering amount, but the money did not anger me as much as the deception. They had banked on my guilt. They had banked on the fact that I would never check, or that if I did, I would be too soft to do anything about it. I typed out a draft email to my bank manager, requesting an immediate freeze on all shared assets due to suspected fraudulent activity. I did not hit send yet. I needed everything to be perfect. I needed the trap to snap shut all at once, with no room for them to wiggle out. As the sun began to rise over the Seattle skyline, casting a gray light into my office, I felt a strange sense of peace. The Evelyn who sought their approval was dead. She had died the moment she walked out of those double doors. The woman sitting in this chair was someone entirely different. I was the CEO of my own life now, and I was about to execute the most aggressive restructuring plan my family had ever seen. The emotional numbness I felt was a gift. It allowed me to function with the precision of a machine. I spent the next 48 hours building a case against my own flesh and blood, treating the dining room table of my condo as a war room. I sifted through 10 years of tax returns, loan applications, and email correspondence, looking for the smoking gun. I did not have to look far. The first crack in their facade appeared in a digitally archived mortgage refinancing application from 4 years ago. The document claimed that I had co-signed for a restructuring of my parents' home loan to secure a lower interest rate. I zoomed in on the signature at the bottom of the page. It spelled my name, certainly, but the loop on the Y was too wide, and the slant was slightly to the left. It was my mother's handwriting. I checked my passport stamps for that date. I had been in London for a business conference. It was physically impossible for me to have been in the notary's office in Seattle. I printed the page and added it to a physical binder. Then I found another. A line of credit opened in my name to fund home improvements that I never authorized. The statements mailed to a P.O. box my father controlled. They had been sloppy, arrogant in their certainty that I would never audit them. I needed verification. I called Sarah Jenkins, a senior partner at Sterling & Vance, a corporate law firm known for its aggressive litigation tactics. Sarah and I had gone to college together, and she was the only person outside the family I trusted with the full extent of my humiliation. We met in a private conference room at her firm's downtown office, far away from the prying eyes of my parents' social circle. I laid the binder on the glass table between us. Sarah opened it, her professional mask slipping for a fraction of a second as she scanned the pages. "Evelyn," she said, her voice dropping to a whisper. "This isn't just unethical. This is criminal fraud." "Do you realize the exposure they have here? I do," I replied, my voice steady. "I want to know my options. Not the nice options, the nuclear ones." Sarah adjusted her glasses and looked at me with a mixture of pity and respect. "If we file a police report, your parents could be looking at prison time. Identity theft, wire fraud, forgery. The list is long. But I assume you don't want to see your mother in handcuffs on the evening news. I want my freedom," I said. "And I want every cent they stole returned to me. I want to sever all legal ties so thoroughly that they can never use my name again." "We can do that," Sarah said, tapping a pen against the file. "We draft a formal demand letter. We attach the evidence of the forgery. We give them 24 hours to agree to a complete separation of assets and restitution. Or we go to the authorities. It is blackmail, legally speaking. But it's also a settlement offer. Draft it," I said. As I left her office, I checked my phone for the first time in 2 days. There were no new missed calls. A text from my mother from the previous night read, "Give yourself time to calm down. We can talk when you are ready to apologize for the scene you caused." They were still operating under the old rules. They believed that my silence was the silence of a petulant child sulking in her room. They thought I was embarrassed, hiding from the world, waiting for their permission to return to the fold. They believed that eventually, the guilt of ruining the engagement party would break me, and I would come back to fix things, just as I always did. They had no idea that my silence was not a retreat. It was the deep breath a sniper takes before pulling the trigger. Their arrogance was their shield, but it was also the blind spot that was going to destroy them. I drove home with the draft of the legal complaint in my passenger seat, finally ready to start the war. At 9 o'clock on Monday morning, exactly 48 hours after the engagement party, I gave Sarah the green light. With a few keystrokes, she severed the financial arteries that had kept the Moore family lifestyle on life support for years. I had authorized the bank to block all transfers to the joint accounts. I canceled the supplementary credit cards I had issued to my parents for emergencies, cards that were currently being used to fund my mother's spa treatments and my father's golf fees. I also stopped the automatic deposit that covered the mortgage on the guest house where Julian was supposedly setting up his art studio. The reaction was almost immediate. By noon, my phone began to light up. It started with Julian. He was at an electronics store, trying to buy a new camera lens that cost $2,000. I let the call go to voicemail. Then came a text. "Hey, Evie. Think there is a glitch with the Amex. Declined twice. Can you call the bank?" Kind of embarrassing standing here. I deleted the message. An hour later, my mother called, then my father. When I did not answer, they moved to the landline at my office. I had already instructed my assistant to screen all calls from family members. "She is in a meeting," my assistant told them, repeating the line we had rehearsed. "She will be unavailable for the remainder of the week." By Tuesday, the confusion had morphed into aggression. They realized this was not a banking error. It was a blockade. They launched a campaign of social pressure. My Aunt Barbara, a woman who had not spoken to me in 6 months except to criticize my weight, left a voicemail dripping with faux concern. "Evelyn, honey, your mother is worried sick. She says you are cutting them off after everything they have done for you. People are starting to talk. Dear, you don't want to be known as the daughter who abandoned her family over a little misunderstanding, do you?" I listened to the message in my kitchen, eating a salad in total silence. I did not feel the old pang of guilt. I felt the cold satisfaction of a general watching the enemy supply lines collapse. I did not respond. My silence was a mirror, forcing them to look at their own desperation. On Wednesday morning, the second phase of my plan hit them. I had Sarah send a courier to my parents' house. He delivered a thick, heavy envelope containing a formal cease and desist order regarding the unauthorized use of my identity, along with a demand letter for the repayment of $157,000. The letter outlined the evidence of forgery and fraud, attaching copies of the documents I had found. It stated clearly that if they did not agree to a binding settlement and a complete separation of assets within 72 hours, we would file criminal charges. The silence from their end that afternoon was heavy. For the first time in days, the phone stopped ringing. They were reading. They were realizing that the quiet, reliable Evelyn they thought they owned had been replaced by a stranger who held the keys to their destruction. My father sent a single email that evening. The subject line was simply "family meeting." The body of the email was devoid of the usual manipulation and flowery language. "We need to talk. Not on the phone. Come to the house tomorrow night." I replied 5 minutes later, copying Sarah on the email. "I will not come to the house. If you wish to discuss the terms of the settlement, we can meet at the chaotic neutral ground of the Grand Conference Room at the Hilton downtown on Thursday at 6 o'clock in the evening. My attorney will be present. If you do not show up, we file the police report on Friday morning." There was a long pause before the reply came. "We will be there." They were terrified. I could feel it through the screen. Their moral high ground had crumbled the moment they saw their own signatures on those fraudulent documents. They were no longer the aggrieved parents dealing with a rebellious child. They were suspects trying to avoid indictment. As I closed my laptop, I knew the hardest part was yet to come. But for the first time in my life, I was not walking into a room to be scolded. I was walking in to negotiate the terms of their surrender. The conference room at the Hilton was sterile, smelling faintly of lemon polish and stale air conditioning. Sarah sat to my right, her posture rigid and professional. I sat with my hands folded on the table, watching the door. When it opened, my parents and Julian walked in. They looked less like a family coming to a meeting and more like a delegation arriving to quell a rebellion. My father was wearing his best suit, the one he wore to board meetings to intimidate junior partners. My mother had worn a soft, pastel cardigan, likely chosen to make her look maternal and harmless. Julian just looked bored, checking his watch as he slumped into a chair. "This is ridiculous," my father said as he tossed his briefcase onto the table. He did not look at Sarah. He looked only at me, his eyes hard, dragging strangers into family business. "We are not here to negotiate. Evelyn, we are here to talk some sense into you." "Sit down," I said. My voice was not loud, but it cut through the room like a razor. "Don't take that tone with me," he snapped, though he pulled out a chair. "You have embarrassed us enough, freezing the accounts, sending threatening letters. You are acting like a petulant child." "I am acting like a creditor," I corrected him. "And you are acting like people who don't realize they are standing on a trap door." I slid the black binder across the polished wood table. It stopped directly in front of him. "Open it!" My father scoffed, but he flipped the cover open. As he turned the first page, his expression of annoyance faltered. Then he turned to the second page, the third. The silence in the room grew heavy, suffocating. My mother leaned over to look, and I saw the color drain from her face. "This..." My father started, his voice losing its boom. "This is private financial information." "How did you get this?" "I got it because you used my name to authorize it." I said calmly. "Page 4, the refinancing application. That is Mom's handwriting. I was in London. That is fraud." Page 10, the emergency credit card. You maxed it out on Julian's trip to Cabo. That is theft. Page 15, the withdrawal from the joint account. You labeled it medical expenses. I checked the dates. "It was the same week you bought the new boat engine. We were going to pay it back," my mother cried out, clutching her pearls. "It was just a bridge loan. We are family. Evelyn, money is fluid in a family. Money is property," Sarah interjected, her tone legal and dry. "And forging a signature is a felony. In this state, given the amount exceeds $100,000, you are looking at a minimum of 5 years in prison. Each." The word prison hung in the air. Julian stopped slouching. He looked from me to our parents, his eyes wide. You wouldn't," Julian stammered. "You wouldn't put Mom and Dad in jail." "You're bluffing. Try me," I said. I looked at my brother, really looked at him. "You think I am the sister who fixes things? That person doesn't exist anymore. She died at the engagement party when you tried to steal my future to pay for your hobbies." My father slammed the binder shut. "So what do you want? An apology? Fine. We are sorry. We made a mistake. We should have asked. Are you happy now? I don't want your apology." I said, "I want my life back, and I want to be paid." I signaled to Sarah, who pulled a document from her briefcase and placed it on the table. "This is a confession of judgment and a repayment agreement." I explained. "It states that you acknowledge the debt of $157,000. You will agree to a payment plan of $2,000 a month until the debt is cleared. Furthermore, you will sign a waiver relinquishing any and all claims to Grandma's trust fund, effectively immediately. It goes solely to me, as intended." $2,000 a month, my father shouted, his face turning red. "That will cripple us. We have a lifestyle to maintain." "Then sell the boat," I said, my voice flat. "Sell the second car." "I don't care. If you don't sign this paper before you leave this room, Sarah files the police report. I have the precinct on speed dial. It is not a threat. It is a promise." My mother began to weep, a jagged, theatrical sound. "How can you be so cruel? We raised you. We gave you everything. You gave me a roof so you could charge me rent later." I replied, "Sign the papers." They looked at each other. The arrogance was gone, replaced by the terrified realization that they had absolutely no leverage. They had spent 30 years underestimating me, thinking I was weak because I was kind. They were finally seeing the difference. My father picked up the pen. His hand shook. He looked at me one last time, searching for a trace of the daughter who used to crave his approval. He found only a stranger. He signed. Then my mother signed, her tears wetting the paper. "We are done," I said, standing up and taking the document. "Do not contact me unless it is through my lawyer. If you miss a single payment, we go to the police." I walked to the door, leaving them sitting in the ruins of their own entitlement. I did not look back. There was nothing behind me worth seeing. The collapse of the Moore dynasty did not happen with a dramatic explosion, but with the pathetic whimper of bounced checks and liquidated assets. Once the repayment agreement was filed, the illusion of their prosperity evaporated faster than morning mist. Within 2 weeks, the boat, the floating symbol of my father's ego, was listed on a brokerage site. A month later, their membership at the country club, the very place where they had tried to publicly humiliate me, was quietly rescinded due to non-payment of dues. I did not have to say a word to anyone. The rumor mill in our tight-knit community did the work for me. People noticed when my mother stopped hosting her monthly charity luncheons. They noticed when my father stopped driving the luxury sedan and went back to the 5-year-old model he kept in the garage. The narrative shifted. They were no longer the benevolent pillars of the community. They were people living beyond their means who had been cut off. But the rumors were vague enough that no one knew the specific crimes, only that the money was gone. Julian was the first to break under the pressure of reality. Without the monthly stipend from the family accounts, his art studio project collapsed within 30 days. I heard through a mutual acquaintance that he had taken a job as a shift manager at a retail chain. It was honest work, the kind he used to mock as beneath him. I felt no pity. I felt only the satisfaction of seeing gravity finally apply to him. He was finally learning that the world does not owe him a living simply because he exists. I watched all of this from a distance, like a scientist observing a controlled demolition. I did not visit. I did not ask questions. I simply monitored the automatic deposits hitting my bank account on the first of every month, $2,000, like clockwork. It was not enough to make them destitute, but it was enough to make them hurt. It forced them to budget, to scrimp, to feel a fraction of the financial anxiety they had inflicted on me for years. The strain of the debt turned them against each other. My mother, deprived of her retail therapy and social status, began to blame my father for his failed investments. My father, stripped of his authority, lashed out at her spending habits. The perfect marriage, which had been held together by the glue of shared entitlement and my money, began to crack. I saw it in the few photos that surfaced on social media. They looked older, tired. The smiles were gone, replaced by the grimace of people who were trapped in a room with their own mistakes. 6 months after the confrontation, I received one final voicemail from my mother. I sat in my office, staring at the notification light on my phone before pressing play. "Evelyn," her voice cracked, sounding small and frail. It's Christmas next week. We were wondering if you might come by, just for an hour. Your father, he isn't doing well. We miss you. Please, just call back." The old Evelyn would have crumbled. She would have heard the manipulation disguised as vulnerability and rushed over to fix it. She would have written a check to smooth things over, but that woman was gone. I listened to the message a second time, analyzing the tone. There was no apology. There was no acknowledgement of the theft or the lies. There was only the desperate plea of a parasite looking for a host. I did not feel anger. I did not feel hate. I felt a profound, empty silence where my love used to be. I deleted the message. I blocked the number. I did not tell Mark. I did not call Sarah. I simply placed the phone back on my desk and turned my attention to the spreadsheet on my screen. There was nothing left to say. The debt was being paid, but the relationship had been foreclosed on long ago. It has been exactly 1 year since I walked out of that conference room at the Hilton. The seasons have changed. The leaves have turned, and the silence in my life has transformed from a void into a sanctuary. I married Mark 3 months ago in a small ceremony on the coast. There were no grand speeches about family legacies and no performance for business associates. There were only 30 people present, the people who actually know me, and for the first time in my life, I did not have to worry about who was watching or what it cost. I paid for the wedding myself, and every cent was spent on joy rather than obligation. The payments from my parents still arrive on the first of every month, $2,000. The notification pops up on my phone screen, a digital heartbeat reminding me that they are still out there, living in the reality I forced them to accept. I do not feel a thrill when I see the money. I do not feel a sense of triumph. It is simply a transaction. It is the cost of doing business with people who tried to bankrupt my soul. I transfer the money immediately into an investment account I have set up for my future children. It seems poetic that the money they tried to steal from me will eventually support a generation they will likely never meet. I have spent a lot of time redefining what the word family means to me. For 34 years, I thought family was a debt you could never pay off. I thought it meant enduring disrespect because you shared the same DNA. I was wrong. Family is not about blood. It is about behavior. Sarah, my lawyer, is family. Mark is family. The friends who stood by me when the rumors started are family. Robert and Linda are simply the people who raised me, and they voided their contract the moment they chose greed over their daughter. People often ask me if I regret cutting them off completely. They ask if I worry about them as they age, or if I wonder how they are managing their downsized life. The answer is always a calm and absolute no. There is no sequel to this story where we hug and cry and pretend the past did not happen. There is no holiday miracle where I return to their table. I have realized that forgiveness is not always a virtue. Sometimes, forgiveness is just permission for people to hurt you again. I have chosen to protect myself instead. My revenge was not about making them suffer, though I know they are suffering. I know my father hates driving a used car. I know my mother hates being excluded from the high society circles she worshipped. I know Julian hates working a 9-to-5 job, but their pain is a byproduct, not the goal. The true revenge is that I am no longer thinking about them. I am no longer waking up with a knot of anxiety in my chest, wondering what crisis I need to solve or what bill I need to pay. I am free. I own my name. I own my money. I own my future. Yesterday, I drove past the country club where the engagement party happened. I did not speed up. I did not look away. I just watched it pass by the window, a building made of brick and glass, containing a memory that no longer has teeth. I turned up the radio, rolled down the window, and let the cold wind hit my face. The air tasted like rain and pine needles. It tasted like nothing I had ever experienced before. It tasted like my own life. Finally beginning. Thank you so much for listening to my story. I would love to know where you are tuning in from, so please leave a comment below to share your thoughts, and let's get a conversation going. If you enjoyed this story, please subscribe to the Mira Revenge Stories channel, like the video, and hit that hype button to help this story reach even more people.